Next up is Lisa, who is the Climate Program Manager for the Columbia River Gorge Commission, where she works with many partners on climate action and monitoring in the Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me, and I really enjoyed hearing what others have shared already. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Columbia River Gorge Commission, we're a bi-state land use planning agency that works with the Forest Service and many others who are in this room today to implement a management plan that is protecting this place that you all care about, the gorge. And we have a mission that's focused on resource protection, so everything from scenery, recreation, cultural resources and natural resources and habitats to supporting economic development within these urban areas, many of these communities that are now connected with transit, and supporting economic development outside of those urban areas where it's consistent with resource protection. So we have sort of this dual mission, and I was asked to speak about how transit kind of connects with that, specifically when you're thinking about the impacts of climate change here in the Gorge. And so we at the Gorge Commission, we have a climate change action plan that was approved a couple years ago, and it includes many priorities, but one of them is regional transportation. And specifically, there's a goal included in there about increasing ridership. And so it was very exciting if you saw earlier that graph that shows that there is an annual increase after the pandemic. And so one of our roles, we were working with both Kathy and Emily, is really to lift up that story. And because we're regional and we have this board of commissioners and then a small staff, all 6 counties and 2 states are kind of hearing this message about transit and that story of increasing ridership. When you're thinking about what we call mitigating climate change, right? Trying to reduce the sources of the greenhouse gases that are contributing to a warming climate. The transportation sector in the Gorge is the largest contributor of that. Roughly, when you look at both Oregon and Washington statistics by sector, it's in the 35 to 40% range transportation contributes. So you can't really address climate change without looking at transportation. And individual vehicle trips, as we were learning earlier, when you can replace those essentially by providing transit options, that's a concrete way for individuals and communities to address climate change. So that's sort of the nexus with our climate work. But as many others have mentioned here today, in the Gorge, if you travel in the Gorge, you know that congestion can be an issue in certain places, whether it used to be the Dog Mountain Trailhead, and now we have a shuttle option there, or all of the good work that's been done in the waterfall corridor. Another part of our mission is providing a diverse array of recreation experiences and protecting scenic resources as well as air quality. So when you think about congestion, you think about idling cars, anytime that transit is an option, it's also helping to protect that quality of air for people. That has an environmental impact, and it's also protecting the scenery of this area. In particular, the air quality and haze has been an issue over the decades, especially in the winter when we have the inversion. So there's multiple co-benefits of increasing transit. And another thing that I'd like to share, I was really excited to hear that 20 communities or towns are connected. I didn't realize it was that high. That's also an opportunity for locals to be able to get to places they need to, but also to connect visitors and locals to different places within the Gorge, right? There's an economic benefit for people having that access to support communities and shopping there and sharing resources that transit can provide. So we're thinking both about the benefits for people who live and work here and also those that are visiting. And one just last example, this isn't necessarily super, I guess, exciting for everybody, but when you think about a planning agency, what can we do to help promote transit? We can try to, encourage funds coming here in our role. We can work with our planners, share out what's happening, and try to increase use, as Emily has done with me. She was my first person that actually took me on the Columbia Gorge Express a couple years ago. I just realized I forgot to share my transit story, so I'll close with that.
Good.
But you know, when you think our main role, we're actually like reviewing development at some of these recreation sites. So when you have a day use area, a trailhead that you want to go to, is it possible within the current plan to actually have transit go there? Are the accommodations there for a bus to come? And so in our last plan review, we actually made some changes to require that the sort of higher use areas, these day use areas, had those accommodations so transit could go there where maybe it didn't before. So that's another just kind of specific example of how planning agencies can actually help create the infrastructure, and sometimes it's a requirement, sometimes it's encouraging, but to actually allow transit to be at the places where people might want it to be. So I'll just close with my transit story. I've lived in the Northwest the longest of any place, but I moved around a little as a kid, and one of the places I lived was in a suburb of Chicago. And when I was asked this question, I think the first thing that came to mind was just being a kid and taking the school bus. But a memorable experience that quickly came into my mind was taking the train from outside of Chicago in at Christmas time, and just the excitement of seeing what then in the 80s, all of the windows and downtown Chicago and decorated for Christmas. But that experience on the train, I think, was my first time being on a train and being with my parents and just being around lots of different people from different places, and it really stood out to me. And I would say overall I've come to kind of transit a little bit later in life and living in places where it's actually accessible. I've lived in a lot of kind of remote places where it wasn't, but I'm just very grateful to have the Columbia Gorge Express and all of the work that people have done in this region, because it is, it's really important. And when we think about it in the sort of zoomed out thinking about climate change, it's important, and it has so many important values for everybody who live here and visit. So thank you.
Thanks so much.